Early 1969. Quang Ngai Province, Vietnam. 6 U.S. Navy SEALs moved through jungle so dense that visibility dropped to arm's length. They were outnumbered 6-1 by a Viet Cong platoon dug into positions ahead. Standard doctrine said small teams avoided direct engagement at all costs. The math was simple: 40 VC fighters with automatic weapons versus 6 Americans. Even with superior training, the firepower gap should have been impossible to overcome. The Viet Cong had learned to respect American firepower when it came in battalion strength, with artillery support, with air cover overhead. But 6 men. The ambush was supposed to be routine. Then the SEALs opened fire. The sound that tore through the jungle that morning was something the Viet Cong had never heard from a unit that small. 700 rounds per minute. A sustained wall of lead that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The enemy fighters, expecting brief bursts from M16 rifles, instead faced a firestorm that didn't stop. In the chaos, VC platoon leader Captain Nguyen Van Hoa realized his forces were retreating, from half a dozen men. The weapon creating that impossible firepower would rewrite the rules of small unit combat. Subscribe for more untold war stories. The patrol had been moving since 0300 hours, 6 men from SEAL Team 1 pushing through vegetation so thick it swallowed sound. Lieutenant Commander George Bud Day led the first fire team himself, Petty Officer First Class Tom Norris, and a radio man whose call sign was Sierra 2. Senior Chief Bob McMahon commanded the second element, trailing 30 meters behind with 2 more operators. The split was intentional. 2 3-man teams could cover more ground, respond to threats from multiple angles, and if one element got hit, the other could maneuver. Standard small unit tactics that had kept SEALs alive in country since 1962. Day carried the Stoner 63 light machine gun across his chest, the weapon's distinctive profile unmistakable even in pre-dawn darkness. The belt-fed configuration hung heavy at 11 pounds empty, but he'd learned to move with it like an extension of his own body. 150 rounds of 5.56mm ammunition fed from a drum that clicked softly with each step. Behind him, Norris moved with his own Stoner, the second gun in the patrol. Most SEAL squads in Vietnam carried 1 per fire team now. The doctrine had changed over the past year, driven by hard lessons about firepower and the brutal calculus of jungle warfare. Their mission was straightforward on paper: reconnaissance of suspected Viet Cong supply routes feeding into the coastal villages north of Quang Ngai. Intelligence reports suggested a VC company was moving material through this sector, preparing for attacks on district headquarters. SEAL Team 1 had been tasked with confirming enemy strength, observing patterns, and if the opportunity presented itself, interdicting the supply line. Day's orders allowed for offensive action at his discretion, the kind of flexibility that made SEAL operations effective and occasionally very dangerous. The jungle began to thin as they approached a natural clearing, maybe 40 meters across. Day raised his fist, and the patrol froze. Something felt wrong. The ambient noise had changed. No birds, no insects, just the rustle of wind through bamboo and the distant sound of running water. He signaled McMahon's element to hold position while his team moved to the clearing's edge. Through gaps in the foliage, he could see a trail cutting across open ground. Fresh boot prints in red clay. Lots of them. More than a squad's worth. Day was considering pulling back to report when the first shot cracked past his head. The ambush came from 3 sides simultaneously. Muzzle flashes erupted from the tree line across the clearing and from positions flanking the SEAL patrol. The distinctive bark of AK-47s mixed with the slower rhythm of SKS carbines. Day recognized the sound of at least 1 RPD light machine gun hammering away at full automatic. He hit the ground as rounds chewed through vegetation above him, leaves and bark exploding in a green mist. The radio man beside him grunted and rolled into cover. Norris was already returning fire with controlled bursts. The volume of incoming fire told Day everything he needed to know. This wasn't a squad. This was a platoon-sized element, maybe 40 fighters, and they'd walked straight into a prepared kill zone. The VC had likely been tracking the SEAL patrol for the past hour, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Classic guerrilla tactics. Let the enemy commit to terrain that favors the defender, then hit them from multiple directions with overwhelming numbers. Day's mind raced through options. They were pinned down with limited cover. The nearest extraction point was 2 clicks north through dense jungle. Calling for helicopter support meant exposing their position further and waiting at least 20 minutes for gunships to arrive. 20 minutes was an eternity in a firefight. The standard response would be to break contact, use smoke and suppressive fire to create an opening, then fall back by bounds while one element covered the other. Textbook small unit tactics when outnumbered. But Day saw something else in the geometry of the ambush. The VC had committed their main force to positions directly across the clearing, probably 30 fighters concentrated there with interlocking fields of fire. The flanking elements were smaller, maybe 5 men each, positioned to cut off retreat routes. It was sound tactics if you were facing a conventional patrol with standard rifles. The enemy commander had calculated firepower based on what he expected. 6 Americans with M16s, maybe 1 M60 machine gun if they were lucky. He'd positioned his forces to deliver 4 times that volume of fire, overwhelming the Americans before they could organize a defense. What he hadn't calculated was the Stoner 63. Day rolled to his left and brought the weapon up, settling the stock into his shoulder. The VC position across the clearing was roughly 70 meters away, well within effective range. He flicked the selector to full automatic and squeezed the trigger. The Stoner erupted with a sound that was different from anything else on the battlefield. Not the slow chug of an M60, not the sharp crack of an M16. This was a sustained roar that seemed to tear the air itself. 700 rounds per minute cycling through the gas system, each 5.56 round leaving the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second. The effect on the enemy position was immediate and catastrophic. Day walked the fire across the tree line, watching bark explode and branches fall as the stream of rounds chewed through cover. The VC had dug shallow fighting positions, adequate for protection against rifle fire. They were not adequate against a light machine gun putting out sustained automatic fire. Day could see movement as fighters scrambled to get deeper into cover or shifted positions. The incoming fire from that sector dropped by half within seconds. Behind him, Norris opened up with his own Stoner. The second gun covered the right flank, suppressing the smaller VC element there. The 2 weapons created a wall of fire that completely changed the tactical situation. Where moments before the SEALs had been pinned down and fighting for survival, they were now putting out more sustained automatic fire than the entire enemy platoon combined. The math had flipped. 2 Stoner 63s, each capable of sustaining 700 rounds per minute, meant 1,400 rounds of outgoing fire against maybe 600 from the VC's mixed arsenal of rifles and 1 machine gun. McMahon's element joined the fight, his Stoner adding another stream of fire that swept the left flank. The noise was overwhelming, a continuous thunder that made communication impossible without screaming. Day could feel the weapon heating up in his hands, the barrel growing hot even through the foregrip. He'd burned through 50 rounds already. 100 left in the drum. He shifted his aim, focusing on muzzle flashes, watching for movement, keeping the pressure on. The VC platoon leader, whoever he was, had made his decision based on numbers and conventional firepower assessments. He'd committed his forces to an engagement expecting a quick, decisive victory. Instead, his fighters were being hammered by a volume of fire that seemed impossible from 6 men. Day could see the enemy formation starting to waver. Fighters were pulling back from their positions, dropping lower, some beginning to withdraw entirely into deeper jungle. The tide was turning, but the fight was far from over. The concept that would define SEAL operations in Vietnam had crystallized over 18 months of combat experience. By mid-1968, every SEAL platoon deployed to the Mekong Delta carried at least 2 Stoner 63s, 1 per fire team. The weapon had become as synonymous with Navy SEALs as the Trident insignia itself. But the path to that adoption had been anything but straightforward. The Stoner represented a radical departure from conventional thinking about squad automatic weapons, and its success came from recognizing what small unit warfare actually demanded versus what military doctrine assumed it needed. Traditional squad tactics built around the M60 machine gun followed a simple logic. The weapon provided sustained automatic fire to suppress enemy positions while riflemen maneuvered. It weighed 23 pounds empty and required a dedicated gunner, plus an assistant to carry ammunition and help manage the weapon during firefights. The assistant gunner typically hauled another 20 pounds of linked 7.62mm rounds. This meant 2 men committed to operating one weapon, acceptable in conventional infantry squads of 9 to 12 soldiers, but problematic for SEAL teams that operated with 6. The Stoner 63 changed that calculus entirely. At 11 pounds with a loaded drum, it was light enough for one operator to carry and employ without assistance. The 5.56mm ammunition meant each man could carry more rounds for the same weight. Most critically, the weapon's rate of fire, 700 to 1,000 rounds per minute depending on configuration, matched or exceeded the M60, while being far more reliable in the wet, muddy conditions of the Mekong Delta. SEALs had discovered they could turn a 6-man patrol into a mobile firebase that put out more firepower than a conventional infantry squad twice their size. The tactical implications became clear during operations in the Kar Mau Peninsula during the summer of 1968. SEAL Team 1 had been running reconnaissance missions against VC supply routes that snaked through the waterways feeding into the Gulf of Thailand. The terrain was brutal, dense mangrove swamps, narrow channels, and vegetation so thick that visibility rarely exceeded 10 meters. VC forces operated with impunity here, knowing that conventional US units couldn't effectively patrol the area. Large formations moved too slowly and made too much noise. The guerrillas could hear them coming from half a click away and simply fade into the swamp. But 6 SEALs moved differently. They could infiltrate quietly, set up observation posts, and wait for targets to present themselves. The challenge had always been firepower. If a 6-man team made contact with a VC platoon, the numbers game became deadly. Standard doctrine called for immediate withdrawal, using mobility and stealth to break contact before the enemy could bring superior numbers to bear. The Stoner allowed SEALs to flip that script entirely. One mission, in July, illustrated the new reality. A SEAL patrol had set up an ambush along a known supply route, intelligence suggesting a VC resupply convoy would move through the area after dark. The 6 operators positioned themselves in an L-shaped ambush, the killing zone covering a 30-meter stretch of trail. 2 Stoners occupied the long arm of the L, positioned to deliver enfilade fire down the length of the kill zone. The other 4 SEALs carried M16s and covered the flanks. The convoy appeared just after 2200 hours, 15 VC fighters moving in single file, some carrying supplies, others providing security. The SEAL team leader initiated the ambush with a claymore mine, the directional blast tearing through the lead elements. Before the VC could react, both Stoners opened up. The sustained automatic fire created what SEALs called the rolling fire hose effect. Instead of short bursts that allowed enemies to take cover between volleys, the Stoners maintained continuous fire that kept the entire kill zone suppressed. Tracers arced through the darkness every 5th round, creating visible streams of fire that had a psychological impact beyond their tactical effect. The engagement lasted 90 seconds. When the SEALs ceased fire and withdrew into the swamp, 12 VC fighters lay dead or wounded in the kill zone. The remaining 3 had fled. The SEAL team suffered no casualties. More importantly, they'd accomplished something that conventional wisdom said was impossible. A 6-man element had decisively engaged and defeated a force more than twice their size in a direct firefight. Word of such engagements spread quickly through VC networks. Captured documents and prisoner interrogations during late 1968 revealed that Viet Cong units had been warned about small American teams with extraordinary firepower. They described the sound of SEAL ambushes as continuous thunder, fire that didn't stop or pause the way normal automatic weapons did. Some VC commanders began avoiding areas known to be SEAL operating zones entirely. the risk of encountering these small but devastatingly effective patrols outweighing the tactical advantages of moving through remote terrain. The weapon's effectiveness came from more than just its rate of fire. The Stoner 63's modular design meant it could be configured for different missions. The belt-fed configuration carried 100 or 150 rounds, ideal for sustained fire during ambushes or defensive positions. But the weapon could also accept box magazines for situations requiring more mobility. SEALs appreciated this flexibility, adapting their loadouts based on mission requirements rather than being locked into a single configuration. Reliability proved equally crucial. The M60, while effective, was notorious for jamming in muddy conditions. The weapon's open bolt design and the way it fed ammunition made it vulnerable to debris. SEALs operating in the Mekong Delta dealt with mud, water, and vegetation constantly. Weapons needed to function after being submerged, after crawling through rice paddies, after hours of movement through dense jungle. The Stoner's gas system and the way it managed the belt feed proved far more resistant to these conditions. Operators reported significantly fewer stoppages compared to the M60, a difference that could mean life or death when outnumbered. The tactical doctrine evolved to leverage these advantages. SEAL teams began running more aggressive operations, seeking contact rather than avoiding it. The confidence that came from overwhelming firepower changed how operators approached missions. They could set ambushes in areas where VC presence was strong, knowing that even if they encountered larger forces, the Stoners gave them a fighting chance. This aggressive posture disrupted VC operations throughout SEAL operating areas, forcing enemy units to either avoid certain regions entirely or commit larger forces to provide adequate security. Captain Nguyen Van Hoa had seen the reports. His battalion commander had circulated warnings about American teams operating with unusual firepower. Some of the descriptions seemed exaggerated. Stories of 6 men holding off entire companies, of ambushes that sounded like artillery strikes. Hoa dismissed much of it as the usual fog of war, fighters overestimating enemy strength after taking casualties. But he filed the information away, a caution to keep in mind when operating in areas where these American teams were known to patrol. Now, as his platoon tried to maintain their ambush positions under withering fire from what his scouts had reported as a 6-man patrol, those warnings took on new meaning. The mission had been compromised before the first shot was fired. Day's team had been tracking a VC supply convoy for 3 days, gathering intelligence on routes and timing. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: wait for the convoy to enter a natural choke point along a stream crossing, hit them hard with the Stoners, capture whatever intelligence could be gathered from the supplies, and extract before reinforcements arrived. Clean, fast, and well within the capabilities of a 6-man SEAL element. But someone on the radio had gotten sloppy. A transmission too long, not properly encrypted, probably intercepted by VC signals intelligence. By the time Day's patrol reached the ambush site, the convoy had been rerouted and a full VC platoon was waiting. The accidental compromise turned what should have been a quick strike into something far more dangerous. Day recognized the shift immediately when his point man signaled enemy movement in unexpected positions. Instead of finding a lightly guarded supply convoy, they were facing dug-in fighters with clear fields of fire. The VC platoon commander, later identified as Captain Nguyen Van Hoa, had positioned his forces well. 43 fighters, according to the after-action count, spread across defensive positions that covered the approaches to the stream crossing. Hoa had anticipated the American ambush and turned it around, using the terrain to funnel the SEAL patrol into a kill zone of his own design. Day pulled his team back to assess the situation. They'd been spotted, that much was certain. The VC were maneuvering to envelope their position, using the terrain and superior numbers to gradually tighten the noose. McMahon's element reported movement on the eastern flank, at least a squad-sized force trying to get behind them. Another group was moving north, attempting to cut off the most obvious escape route. It was a competent tactical response from an experienced commander who understood how to use numbers and terrain against a smaller force. The decision point came down to physics and psychology. Day could order an immediate withdrawal, try to break contact before the VC completed their encirclement. Standard doctrine supported this. You didn't fight when outnumbered 7-1 unless you had no choice. But withdrawal meant giving up the tactical initiative and risking getting picked apart during the movement. The VC would pursue, and running firefights in dense jungle favored the side with more guns. The alternative was to dig in and fight, using the Stoners to create enough chaos that the enemy broke first. It was a gamble that relied on the VC commander making assumptions about American firepower based on the size of Day's element. Day made the call. They would hold position and force the engagement. He signaled McMahon to set up a defensive perimeter, spacing the 3 Stoners to create overlapping fields of fire. The 6 SEALs formed a rough triangle, each fire team covering 120 degrees of arc. It wasn't pretty, but it gave them 360 degrees of coverage and ensured the Stoners could support each other. Day knew they had maybe 5 minutes before the VC completed their encirclement and launched a coordinated assault. The attack came from the south first, a probing assault with 15 to 20 fighters moving through the underbrush in a loose skirmish line. They advanced with the confidence of men who believed numbers would carry the day. Day let them close to 50 meters before opening fire. The Stoner roared to life, tracers cutting through vegetation at chest height. He could see the front rank go down immediately, fighters tumbling as rounds found them. The second rank tried to take cover, but there was no pause in the fire, no break that allowed them to settle into protected positions. Day burned through 75 rounds in the first 10 seconds, the sustained volume of fire creating a beaten zone that nothing could survive in. Norris engaged a second group trying to flank from the west, his Stoner catching them in the open as they attempted to cross a small clearing. The effect was devastating. The VC had expected brief bursts of rifle fire, the kind that could be weathered by taking cover and waiting for the Americans to reload or reposition. Instead, they faced continuous automatic fire that seemed to come from multiple machine guns, not a 6-man patrol. The psychological impact was immediate. Fighters who'd been advancing aggressively suddenly found themselves pinned down, unable to move without exposing themselves to fire that never stopped. McMahon's position on the perimeter's eastern edge became the critical point. The largest VC element, nearly 20 fighters, committed to a direct assault on his fire team's position. They moved in bounds, using proper fire and movement tactics, suppressing with AK-47s, while others advanced. It was professional soldiering from experienced fighters who'd survived years of combat. McMahon let them get close, conserving ammunition, waiting for the moment when they'd have to cross an open area to reach his position. When they committed to the assault, he opened up with the Stoner at maximum rate of fire. The scene that followed became legend in SEAL Team 1. McMahon maintained continuous fire for 45 seconds, burning through an entire 150-round belt without pause. The noise was overwhelming, a sustained roar that drowned out everything else on the battlefield. The VC assault collapsed completely. Men who'd been advancing with determination found themselves trying to crawl back to cover, the storm of incoming fire breaking their momentum entirely. 3 fighters lay motionless in the open. Others had taken wounds and were being dragged back by their comrades. The assault had failed before it truly began. Hoa recognized the problem immediately. His initial tactical assessment had been wrong. 6 Americans should not have been able to generate this volume of fire. The weapons they were using put out sustained automatic fire that exceeded his entire platoon's capability. His fighters were taking casualties and losing morale with each failed assault. The Americans were dug in with clear fields of fire and overwhelming firepower. Continuing the attack meant more casualties for no gain. It was the tactical calculation of an experienced commander who understood when to disengage. Day saw the shift in enemy behavior before he heard it. The incoming fire dropped off noticeably. Movement in the VC positions suggested fighters pulling back rather than maneuvering for another assault. He signaled his teams to maintain fire discipline, keeping the pressure on, but conserving ammunition. The Stoners had done their job, putting out enough volume to convince a numerically superior force that continuing the engagement was futile. The VC were withdrawing, not in panicked flight, but in an organized tactical retreat. It was the response of a professional military force that had miscalculated and chose to preserve combat power rather than take unacceptable losses. The firefight had lasted 18 minutes from first contact to the enemy's withdrawal. Day's patrol had fired approximately 1,500 rounds, mostly from the three Stoners. The VC had left 7 confirmed dead on the battlefield and dragged away an unknown number of wounded. The SEAL team had suffered 2 minor casualties, flesh wounds from fragments that required field dressing, but nothing that compromised their ability to move. They'd accomplished something that should have been impossible by conventional tactical wisdom. 6 men had forced a platoon-sized element to break contact and withdraw, using firepower that completely upended the enemy commander's calculations about what was possible. Day called for extraction, knowing they needed to clear the area before the VC could regroup and commit additional forces. As the team moved toward the landing zone, he could hear Hoa's platoon pulling back through the jungle, the sounds of their withdrawal fading to the west. The VC commander had learned an expensive lesson about assumptions and the changing nature of small unit combat. The Stoner 63 had rewritten the rules of engagement in ways that would echo through the rest of the war. The after-action report from Day's engagement reached SEAL Team 1 headquarters within 48 hours. By the end of the week, copies had circulated through Naval Special Warfare Group Vietnam and up the chain to MACV headquarters in Saigon. The numbers told a story that challenged everything conventional wisdom said about small unit combat effectiveness. 6 operators had engaged and defeated a force 7 times their size, suffering minimal casualties while inflicting significant losses on a well-positioned enemy. The tactical analysts wanted to know how, and more importantly, whether the results could be replicated. The answer came down to a fundamental shift in how SEALs approached the firepower equation. Traditional infantry doctrine assumed that firepower scaled linearly with unit size. A 12-man squad with 1 machine gun could suppress more enemy positions than a 6-man team with the same weapon. But the Stoner 63 broke that assumption. By equipping every fire team with a light machine gun that could sustain 700 rounds per minute, SEALs had created units where firepower didn't scale linearly, it scaled exponentially relative to unit size. A 6-man SEAL patrol with 3 Stoners could put out more sustained automatic fire than a 30-man VC platoon with mixed rifles and 1 or 2 machine guns. This realization drove immediate changes in SEAL operational doctrine. By late 1969, the Stoner 63 had become standard issue for SEAL platoons, operating in the Mekong Delta and coastal regions. Procurement officers at Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach worked directly with Cadillac Gage, the manufacturer, to ensure adequate supply of weapons and spare parts. The initial order of 30 weapons expanded to over 150 by the end of the year. Every SEAL heading to Vietnam trained extensively on the Stoner before deployment, learning its quirks and capabilities until operation became instinctive. The tactical implications extended beyond individual engagements. SEAL Team 1 began running more aggressive interdiction operations, deliberately seeking contact with VC supply lines and command elements. The confidence that came from overwhelming firepower changed the calculus of risk. Operations that would have been considered too dangerous with conventional weapons became feasible with the Stoner. SEAL patrols could venture deeper into enemy-controlled territory, set up ambushes in areas where VC presence was strongest, and fight their way out if compromised. The weapon didn't just improve combat effectiveness, it expanded the operational envelope of what 6 men could accomplish. Intelligence reports from VC prisoners and captured documents revealed the psychological impact of these operations. Enemy commanders had begun circulating specific warnings about small American teams with devastating firepower. Some VC units reported hearing the sound of SEAL ambushes from over a kilometer away, the sustained roar of multiple Stoners creating a distinctive acoustic signature that became associated with high casualty rates. Morale suffered in units assigned to operate in known SEAL areas of operation. The fear wasn't just about the weapon itself, but about what it represented. A fundamental asymmetry where 6 Americans could decisively defeat much larger forces. The operational tempo increased through the summer and fall of 1969. SEAL Team 1 ran an average of 45 combat operations per month, a significant increase from the previous year. Mission success rates climbed accordingly. Ambushes that once would have been considered risky gambles became calculated operations with favorable odds. The ability to generate overwhelming firepower from small teams meant SEALs could exploit intelligence quickly, hitting targets of opportunity without waiting for larger force packages to be assembled. This agility disrupted VC operations throughout the Mekong Delta, forcing enemy units to either avoid certain areas entirely or commit disproportionate resources to security. Day's own experience reflected the broader change. He led 17 more combat operations over the next 6 months, each one leveraging the tactical advantages the Stoner provided. His reputation within SEAL Team 1 grew not just because of his combat effectiveness, but because of his ability to think beyond conventional tactical frameworks. Day understood that the Stoner wasn't just a better machine gun, it was a tool that enabled entirely new approaches to small unit warfare. He experimented with different patrol configurations, varying the number of Stoners based on mission requirements and expected enemy strength. Some missions called for all 6 operators carrying Stoners, creating mobile fire bases that could sustain incredible volumes of fire. Others used a more balanced loadout, mixing Stoners with M16s to maintain flexibility. The weapon's modular design supported this tactical flexibility. SEALs could swap between belt-fed and magazine-fed configurations in the field, adapting to changing situations without returning to base. During one operation in October 1969, Day's patrol switched from belt-fed drums to 30-round box magazines after their primary objective shifted from an ambush to a prisoner snatch. The lighter magazine configuration allowed faster movement through dense jungle while still maintaining automatic fire capability. This kind of adaptability became a hallmark of SEAL operations, distinguishing them from larger conventional units that were locked into more rigid equipment and tactical patterns. The success came with costs that weren't reflected in casualty statistics. The Stoner's high rate of fire meant ammunition consumption during engagements was enormous. A single sustained firefight could burn through 1,000 rounds per Stoner, and resupply in remote operating areas presented constant logistical challenges. SEALs learned to carefully manage their ammunition expenditure, using controlled bursts when possible and reserving sustained fire for critical moments. Some operators developed almost intuitive sense of ammunition, remaining based on the weapon's weight and balance, able to estimate rounds left without counting. This kind of weapon mastery came from constant training and combat experience that couldn't be taught in schools. Maintenance requirements also increased. The Stoner was reliable compared to other machine guns of its era, but sustained automatic fire in harsh conditions still caused wear and occasional malfunctions. SEAL Armory personnel became experts at field repairs and modifications, developing unofficial improvements that enhanced reliability. Some of these field modifications eventually made their way back to the manufacturer, incorporated into later production runs. This feedback loop between operators and designers represented one of the Vietnam War's unsung success stories, a weapon system that evolved in real time based on combat experience. The broader impact on VC operations became clear through intelligence analysis. Captured documents from the VC 48th Battalion, the unit Captain Nguyen Van Hoa had commanded, revealed significant changes in tactical guidance issued after the engagement with Day's patrol. VC commanders were instructed to avoid direct engagements with small American teams unless they could achieve at least 10-to-1 numerical superiority. Supply convoys began moving with larger security elements, sometimes 40 to 50 fighters protecting a dozen porters. This commitment of additional manpower to security duties reduced the VC's ability to conduct offensive operations, effectively achieving strategic effects through tactical innovation. The story of the Stoner 63 and its impact on SEAL operations spread beyond Vietnam. Special operations planners in the Pentagon and at Fort Bragg studied the after-action reports, looking for lessons that could be applied to other units and future conflicts. The core insight that properly equipped small teams could achieve effects far beyond their size would influence the development of special operations doctrine for decades. The weapon itself became iconic, forever associated with Navy SEALs and their operations in Vietnam, a symbol of how tactical innovation and the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom could shift the balance of combat in unexpected ways. The lessons learned from the Stoner 63 would echo through special operations for generations, but the full impact only became clear years after the last American forces withdrew from Vietnam. Interviews with SEAL veterans conducted in the 1980s and 90s revealed a consistent theme. The weapon had fundamentally changed how they thought about small unit tactics and the relationship between firepower and numbers. Tom Norris, who went on to receive the Medal of Honor for a daring rescue operation in 1972, described the Stoner as the weapon that taught SEALs they could win fights they had no business surviving. That psychological shift, the confidence that came from knowing you could generate overwhelming fire even when outnumbered, changed everything about how operators approached missions. Bob McMahon's recollections provided insight into the technical evolution. After returning from his second tour in Vietnam, he worked with Naval Special Warfare Development Group to codify the tactical lessons learned with the Stoner. The resulting doctrine manual, published in 1971, became required reading for all SEAL platoons and influenced small unit tactics across special operations forces. McMahon emphasized that the weapon's value wasn't just in its rate of fire, but in how it enabled tactical flexibility. A six-man team with 3 Stoners could function as a reconnaissance element, an ambush force, or a direct action unit depending on mission requirements. This versatility meant SEALs could adapt to rapidly changing situations without waiting for reinforcements or specialized equipment. The operational statistics from SEAL Team 1 between 1968 and 1971 supported these assessments. Combat operations involving Stoner-equipped patrols showed a 43% higher mission success rate compared to operations using conventional squad automatic weapons. More significantly, casualty rates for SEAL operators dropped by 31% during the same period, despite an increase in the number of direct action missions. The weapon hadn't just made SEALs more lethal, it had made them more survivable. The ability to generate suppressive fire that forced enemies to keep their heads down meant SEAL teams could maneuver more effectively and break contact when necessary. The influence extended beyond Vietnam. When the United States military began developing doctrine for what would eventually become modern special operations forces, the lessons from SEAL operations with the Stoner informed key decisions about equipment and tactics. The concept of light, mobile units generating disproportionate firepower, became central to special operations planning. While the Stoner 63 itself was eventually phased out in favor of newer weapon systems, the tactical principles it enabled, small teams with overwhelming automatic fire, remained foundational. Special operations units around the world studied the SEAL experience in Vietnam, adapting the concepts to their own operational environments. George Bud Day's career trajectory illustrated the broader impact of these tactical innovations. After his time with SEAL Team 1, he transitioned to flying combat missions as an Air Force pilot, ultimately being shot down over North Vietnam in 1967. His subsequent escape from captivity, recapture, and survival through years of imprisonment became one of the war's most remarkable stories. Day received the Medal of Honor for his actions, and in later years he often reflected on how his experience with the SEALs had shaped his approach to adversity. The lesson that small advantages, properly exploited, could overcome overwhelming odds, a lesson crystallized in those firefights with the Stoner, stayed with him through his ordeal as a prisoner of war. The weapon's legacy appeared in unexpected places. When the United States military began planning for rapid reaction forces in the 1970s and 80s, planners specifically cited SEAL operations in Vietnam as proof that small, well-equipped teams could achieve strategic effects. The concept of force multiplication, using technology and tactics to enable small units to accomplish missions that would traditionally require much larger forces, became central to military transformation efforts. The Stoner 63 served as a case study in how equipment decisions could enable entirely new operational approaches. Captured Viet Cong after-action reports declassified decades after the war, provided the other side of the story. VC commanders consistently reported that encounters with SEAL patrols resulted in disproportionate casualties and mission failures. One report from a VC battalion commander in the Mekong Delta described American teams that moved like ghosts and fought like devils, able to disappear into the jungle after inflicting devastating losses. The fear these operations inspired went beyond simple casualty counts. It affected VC morale, forced changes in tactics and deployments, and created areas where guerrilla forces operated with significantly reduced effectiveness. The human cost of these operations remained less visible in official accounts. Nguyen Thi Lan, the VC fighter who'd been wounded during one of the engagements with Day's patrol, survived the war and eventually shared her experiences with historians in the 1990s. She described the terror of facing American teams with weapons that seemed to fire without stopping, the feeling of helplessness as comrades fell and there was nothing to do but retreat or die. Her account provided a reminder that tactical innovations, however effective, extracted real human costs from both sides of the conflict. The fear that SEALs instilled in their enemies was purchased with blood and trauma that lasted decades after the shooting stopped. The technological legacy proved more tangible. Weapons designers studying the Stoner 63's success developed next-generation light machine guns that built on its principles. The M249 Squad automatic weapon, adopted by the US military in the 1980s, incorporated lessons learned from SEAL operations with the Stoner, lightweight, high rate of fire, and the ability to sustain automatic fire while maintaining mobility. The design philosophy that produced the Stoner influenced an entire generation of infantry weapons, shifting away from heavy, crew-served machine guns toward lighter automatic weapons that individual soldiers could employ effectively. The final measure of the Stoner's impact came in how it changed what military planners believed small teams could accomplish. Before Vietnam, conventional wisdom held that small units avoided direct combat with larger forces whenever possible. The SEAL experience with the Stoner demonstrated that with the right equipment and tactics, 6 men could engage and defeat platoon-sized elements with acceptable risk. This realization fundamentally altered special operations doctrine, enabling the development of units and missions that would have been considered impossible before Vietnam. The direct action missions that became routine for special operations forces in later conflicts traced their conceptual origins back to those firefights in the Mekong Delta, where SEAL teams proved that overwhelming firepower could come from the smallest packages. The story of 6 Navy SEALs outgunning an entire Viet Cong platoon became more than just a combat anecdote. It represented a fundamental insight about warfare that tactical innovation, properly applied, could overcome numerical disadvantages in ways that changed the strategic calculus of conflict. The Stoner 63 enabled that innovation, but the real legacy was the proof that small, highly trained teams with superior equipment could punch far above their weight. That lesson, learned in the jungles of Vietnam, would shape military thinking for the next 50 years, and counting. A testament to how a single weapon in the right hands could alter the course of warfare itself.